Hello and welcome to Chapter 13, The Informative Speech. Hopefully this particular lecture will help walk you through the content you will need to get your ideas flowing for your first major assignment in this class. Our next several assignments will kind of work towards building this presentation. It's not going to be an immediate assignment. It's going to be something that we do take a healthy amount of time to do. But the purpose of this chapter is just to overview what an informative presentation is supposed to be like, and lectures that will come in the future will walk you through the actual content, structure, research, design, and all the rest. So, to begin, theoretically, if this will let me, for a class opener, what I would generally want you to do is, as always, kind of brainstorm for just a moment and think about if you had 5 minutes to teach someone about something that you're really passionate about, what would it be? Would it be a TV show? Would it be a book? Would it be an activity? Would it be a person? Would it be the picture-perfect vacation? Would it be how to pass class? What would you do to walk us through learning about something? So going through that, what would you make sure that they know? What do we need to be aware of? You're going to hear me say this a lot in the next few minutes, but everything when it comes to informing someone is about what they do and do not know already, which is why sometimes these screencasts and PowerPoints can get a little bit repetitive because there's no way for me to remotely access your knowledge on informative speaking, so I have to cover it as if you do not know everything. Whenever you're presenting in front of an audience, you kind of have to do the same mental think through, where you go, okay, what do they know? What might they know? If you have time, send out a survey, because you don't want to talk to someone about something they are very familiar with, because then you'll bore them. I'm sure many of you all have been in class before and you know the content already, so you're just zoning out in the first few minutes. So it's really important to make sure you connect your content to your people. The other idea to emphasize would be, how would you encourage us to remember what you say? You all as students are inundated with information on a daily basis. Quite frankly, on a minutely basis. We have so much information being thrown at us all the time that we do suffer from constant mental overload of information. So you can't really give us, for example, 452 facts about the whale. You might have to narrow that down to something like 6 really important concepts so we have a better chance of absorbing that information. So whenever we kind of work through the particulars of speaking, the main idea, as you're going to hear me say a lot, is that it's all about your audience. What do they know? What are they unfamiliar with? If they already know something, connect what they know to something new and move on to that new information. Spend your time teaching us something fascinating and brilliant, not necessarily recapping what we're already familiar with. Another thing to be aware of, should it allow me to click and get to the next piece, would be that you don't want to overwhelm us with a vast amount of information. I do encourage you all to use statistics, graphs, charts, visual aids, whatever that you might have that might help us, but don't overload us. If you look at the requirements for the presentation, it is not exceptionally long, so you have to be careful with the amount of information you put into it. Let things be simple and try to access what we already know. Do not overcomplicate a simple concept and don't dumb it down too far. So access prior knowledge and see if you can touch base with us on what we know. That's one of the reasons I have discussion questions built into this course, is to kind of get a feel for what do you know, what do you think, what are your opinions, how does this work? So that way I can structure my responses to you around what you need to know and not spend time on what you already do know. Helping us memorize or remember information is very key. Again, one of the symptoms of mental stress is lack of memory. And one of the ways that we will help us remember information is to repeat it, not identically, but to repeat it enough times. So if we zone out, we have at least one chance of catching it. Again, visual aids, numbers, and appropriately cited research can help with that. And again, keeping it simple and keeping it interesting to your audience will really help with the memory cues. As I said, repeat items, phrase them understandably. Make sure you spend some time working on phrasing, making sure you're comfortable with what you need to say. Don't use any extra words if they're not necessary. And use something known as summaries and internal summaries are when we kind of sum up a little bit of the information piece by piece as we go. And we're going to do these using reviews, previews, and transitioning statements, which I'm going to cover in different videos. Now, there are a few different types of informative presentations that you might give. One of those would be a speech of description. Another one is speech of definition, and our third one is a speech of demonstration. So a descriptive presentation is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you give a presentation describing a concept, or an idea, or a place, or a thing. Think of a noun and go for it. Your entire presentation is organized so that it would logically and completely describe something. For example, let's say that you were talking about a vacation in Rome. You would probably have to describe what Rome is like, how we would get there, how much it would cost, what the best activities would be, what food we have to experience, and you would make it sound wonderful. You can't just have a speech that says, you should go to Rome. It's expensive, but tasty. Great, but not a speech. So you would need to break it down into the average costs and how we can get there and what we're going to do and how we're going to make it work. So a speech of description is just organized into categories of information we need to know to adequately describe or understand something. A speech of definition is when you just tell me what something is. You define it, you quantify it, you help me understand it in some way. Let's say that I have a bunch of nursing students in this class, and you might want to pick something from your medical background that you feel we need to be aware of. So your presentation would have to be based on defining whatever it is you might be talking about. For example, you might talk about diabetes and how many people actually know what truly causes it and where the research came from and what we can do about it. So you might spend your entire speech defining the terminology and the history and the background behind this disease so that we understand it more fully. Now, one thing I will say before I go any further is that it is sometimes very difficult to differentiate a persuasive speech from an informative one. And an informative presentation is just sharing information. A persuasive speech is you changing our minds about something. And where this is important is, for example, if I was giving a presentation on diabetes, I would need to be able to effectively give the history and background and science behind it, explain what it really means and what the causes truly are. But I would not be giving you any advice on how you should avoid it. Because as soon as I try to make you do something, that is persuasive. As long as I am just handing you a well-organized packet of information, it is informative. So as you all develop topics and main points this week, something I will ask you to emphasize mentally would be, am I getting them to do something, or am I just handing them information? If you're getting me to do anything, wait, that's later in the semester. That said, the last type of informative presentation that your textbook really explores in detail is a demonstration speech, and that's basically a how-to. So if you have a topic or something you'd like to describe for us how we can do it, that would be great. I've had some students who own their own bakeries, and so they gave a how-to presentation, beginning, middle, and end of decorating a cake. I've had some how-tos on how to make sure we drink enough water. Again, dangerously towing that line between informative and persuasive. But they managed to keep it informative. It was, here's how you can do it, not necessarily how you should do it. So, again, different line there. Moving on, whenever you have your structure picked out and you know what your topic's going to be, you have to find some way of substantiating your claims. So to support your speech, really have some examples to help it make sense to us, especially if it's something we don't have a lot of prior knowledge about. Another thing you can do is to illustrate it. That means to picture, again, describe, to show us what it might be. An illustration is typically a drawing or a cartoon. It's something that demonstrates, shows what the idea or concept is. You can also use a narrative, which is closely linked with testimony. A narrative is a personal story, so that's when you say you provide an example based off of your knowledge and your experience to help us connect with it. Testimony is very similar in that it is a personal narrative, but it's more of a testament or a proof story, normally from someone else, that comes into it. The word testimony is typically used in religious circumstances, and while that's definitely accurate, that is not the only usage for it. A testimony is essentially just a personal recommendation or story. So you might have somebody else you could interview that you'd use as part of a narrative, part of an example where you use a story to explain a piece of your presentation. Welcome to do that. I love stories. Another thing you can do is, of course, have numbers. I'm a huge fan of people actually proving what they say. Numbers are an easy way to do that because most audiences connect effectively with numbers. But something to keep in mind with numeric data is to keep it as simple as possible. If you're going to talk to me about 77.2345% of something, your audience is already lost. Keep it simple. Cite it appropriately, but keep it simple. Of course, definitions as necessary. I've had a few students give me some pretty fascinating medical information, but they didn't define any of their basic terms, so I was flipping through, a dictionary or Google, going through here trying to figure out what the actual terminology was. So make sure that if you're going to introduce something that might be foreign to the majority of your audience, define it as you go. Now, you're welcome to use presentation aids, although I do not require them. You can have the actual item if it's applicable, if it's something you're going to use. You can have a model, graph, or chart if it is effective. Maps, even use a person. Pictures and illustrations are great too. My one huge rule of thumb with presentation aids is that they are for your audience, not for you. And I want to pause for just a second to let that sink in. They are for your audience, not for you. I don't need this PowerPoint. I could go on about informative speaking for years. I've literally gone on about it for years. So I don't need this PowerPoint, but I have it for you so that you know which points of the chapter I'm highlighting to emphasize. Therefore, same rule applies to you. If you're going to have a visual aid, it needs to be for your audience's benefit, not for your personal benefit. If you can't present without that presentation aid, don't have it. That's why people read or lose eye contact or bury themselves in outlines and don't pay attention. This is a presentation. This is completely for the benefit of whoever is watching you. So presentation aids, use them if they're good for your audience. If it's your crutch, do not use it. So if you do use a presentation aid, the biggest emphasis here is just to rehearse, practice with it, know what you're doing. If you're going to record this in a classroom, then you need to make sure you're familiar with the classroom technology. If you are going to have a PowerPoint or Prezi or Nearpod or any of these other amazing technologies that are out there, know how they work before you do it for real. If you're not familiar with it, please don't use it. Another thing I encourage is whatever you use to record your presentations, make sure that you do rehearse with your own technology. I've had a lot of presentations submitted over the year where I just saw feet, or I saw nothing, or it was like behind a person's head, so I couldn't judge their nonverbals. I've even had a few people who have recorded nothing but their rear ends, so I want to make sure I can see you, and actually all of you, when you are giving your presentation. So, to conclude, look at that, short lecture. At the end of your chapter, there's an example of an informative presentation. There are also example presentations throughout D2L that I've placed there for you. I don't have any videos of any because I have to have permission from students to use their videos, so I do not do that. But as far as speech structure and content, that is there for you. And again, the structure and content lectures will happen at a later time. So look at that, spend some time, email me, ask if you have any questions, let me know. I can help get you started. But be well and have a good one. Thank you for your 14 minutes of attention.